my name is Xavier.
And we're both fourth years at the University of Virginia. We're both in the Global Development Studies program, and so 2 years ago we began this research as a way to apply the theory that we were learning in class to development and practice. As we study the positive effect of student agency and local knowledge on childhood nutrition in Charlottesville.
So I first became aware of the issue of food waste and childhood nutrition when I was a teacher in a school in Southeast DC for a year, and that was actually 3 years ago. I was working for an AmeriCorps program called City Year. And I used to eat lunch with my students every day to try to encourage healthy eating practices. And I had different sort of clubs to encourage healthy eating. So there was Mr. Xavier's Greens group, which students could get into if they ate all the green food that was served on their plate. There was Mr. Xavier's Clean Plate Club, which is pretty self-explanatory. And a lot of my students were really excited about being part of these groups. However, there was still a huge issue of food waste in my school. And I remember one day just feeling really, really upset as I filled the trash can up with fresh kale. and then I went to eat my own food with my students, and which consisted of kale that was sauteed with soy sauce and garlic. It was simple but tasty. And one of my students, Damon, said, "Mr. Xavier, can I have a bite?" And I said no, because you just threw away all your food. You're not going to like this. He's like, "Come on, please, have a bite." I was like, "All right, fine, it can't hurt." So I gave him a bite, and to my surprise, he loved it. And he asked for another bite, and that caught all the other students' attention. And out of all the students at my table who I gave some of this kale to, only one of them didn't like it. And so at first I was like, wow, I'm an incredible chef, this is great. But quickly I realized that I think there was a lot more to their desire to eat that kale than just my wonderful cooking. When one of my students asked me, oh, and by the way, this school I was working in was 100% African American and received 100% free and reduced lunch. And one of my students asked me, "Mr. Xavier, are these collard greens?" And I sort of realized, like, wow, this cooked kale, the same exact vegetable, but cooked, looks so much more familiar to what this child might see at home than this raw kale salad that he just threw into the trash can. So after this experience, I transferred to UVA, and I really wanted to inquire as to whether this issue of food waste and childhood nutrition was a national problem, or if it was just a problem that was specific to my school in DC.
So when we began our preliminary research 2 years ago, we found that this is in fact a national issue. A pretty big engine of which is the fact that Michelle Obama has championed the cause of obesity and childhood nutrition while she's been in office. So for you here, we have a video of the First Lady as she implores students to eat the healthy food that will not be served to them in schools because of the Healthy Hunger-Free Kids Act of 2010.
Starting this year, the talented people who cook the food at your school will be offering you all kinds of healthy, delicious new choices. Foods that are good for you and that taste good too. These healthy foods are good for your body. They'll give you energy and make you stronger. And they're also good for your mind. Studies show that when you eat healthy foods like fruits and vegetables, that can actually help you pay attention in class and do a better job on your homework and tests.
So while the First Lady's proposal seems ideal, we wanted to see why, despite this huge change in policy that happened in 2010, there's still such a national urgency around the issue of childhood nutrition. And we wanted to see how well, or not well, the initiative worked at the local level.
So here are some questions that help us understand the issue on a national level. So Sarah, how does the United States rank internationally in terms of food insecurity?
So the IMF has a list of 19 advanced economy countries, and of those 19 countries, the United States actually ranks the worst in terms of food security.
So how important is the National School Lunch Program in terms of childhood nutrition in the United States?
So it's actually pretty important. 32 million students benefit from the program. And of those 32 million, 60% of them consume more than half of their daily calories in a meal that's supplied by the program.
So has the United States government placed an increased amount of importance on student nutrition?
It has. With the Healthy Hunger-Free Kids Act of 2010, that act promised a $4.5 billion increase over 10 years for this issue. So huge amount of money, but when you break it down, that actually only equals a 6-cent increase per meal.
So where did this money actually come from?
Again, $4.5 billion is a huge amount of money, but when you look at the issue a little bit more closely, over half of this budget increase has been taken from federal food stamp program budgets. We think this is pretty significant because it could have some negative implications for low-income students who, because of this budget shift, a more supervised meal at home that was funded by food stamps or by food stamp programs might be sacrificed for a less supervised meal at school.
So how much do the schools actually end up spending on the food itself?
So apart from all extra costs, on average, schools report that they only have about 90 cents to $1 to spend on each child's lunch.
And where does this money actually end up going?
In a study done in 2015 by the Trust for America's Health, schools nationally reported that per day, on average, they wasted an equivalent of $4 million worth of fruits and vegetables.
So it's pretty clear that the nationally underperforming school lunch program exists despite these recent changes in national policy. So our research group decided that we wanted to try to achieve the goals proposed by the Healthy Hunger Free Kids Act without actually making any more changes to the national policy, but rather working within it.
So as we've kind of shown, there's obviously a gap between the original intentions of the national policy and what it looks like on a local scale. So basically we wanted to start at home in a place that we're familiar with in Charlottesville. We wanted to figure out what the problem actually looked like in Charlottesville, and we didn't want to assume that it looked exactly the same as it did in Xavier School in DC. And we wanted to do this so that we could develop well-tailored solutions to the problem as it exists in Charlottesville.
So what did we actually do? What were our methods? First, we began with observations in the two schools, and fun fact, Johnson Elementary is where I went to kindergarten. And we went to these schools to do qualitative observations to gain an understanding qualitatively of the efficacy of their school lunch programs. We took note of several factors we thought contributed to healthy food waste and consumption. So we noticed what foods tended to be wasted and what foods tended to be chosen in the lunch line. We also observed the social interactions in the cafeteria between students, cafeteria staff, and other teachers. And we also took note of how long students had to eat, and we took note of the built environment to see if the physical space had any impact on student consumption.
So before and during these observations, we made sure to stay in contact with our school partners because a focus that we've had throughout this project is maintaining contact with local knowledge and using local knowledge to co-produce the project. So we wanted to use their understanding to check and make sure our understanding was consistent with theirs. So when we were done with the observations, we wanted to see if we could understand the program the challenge from a more quantitative perspective. So we did waste audits in each school. And very briefly, so what we did was we measured the total weight of each food served by item, and then compared that to the total weight wasted in ounces. So then after we analyzed our qualitative and quantitative data, we wanted to make sure, again, that what we found was accurate to the perceptions of our research participants. So we had conversations with students, cafeteria staff, custodial staff that deal with waste, and school principals, and they all found that our findings were pretty accurate.
So what did we actually find? First, we'll go into our qualitative observations, and the first thing we want to mention, we call a relative perspective. So first, we noticed that the staff in schools, especially the staff that had been there for a long time, didn't really seem to think that was much of a problem. In fact, some staff seemed to think that things had gotten a lot better. For example, there was one custodial staff in Johnson that we talked to, and he said that when he was in the school 25 years earlier, there weren't even hardly as many fruit or vegetable options available to the students, and students didn't have any choice whatsoever on what foods made it onto their trays. So relatively, it has gotten better in the schools. However, we want to assess the efficacy of the program based on its proposed effects, not on previous policy.
So the next kind of theme that we noticed through our observations is two-pronged. So there's socialization and socializing. So first, we noticed that in the lunchroom, students they're taught to behave as opposed to eat. There are teacher monitors in each period, and the teachers really focused on teaching the students to abide by certain behaviors, kind of by memory, as opposed to there wasn't as much of a focus on finishing all the food on their plate. So students would be expected to know behaviors like putting a cone on their seat before going to the bathroom, asking permission before they threw away their trash, or learning when to be quiet based on certain disciplinary cues. And then the socializing part. We noticed students love to socialize in the cafeteria, of course, and we're not discouraging that, but we realized that in a lot of these lunch periods, which were around 25 minutes, socializing and talking came at the expense of food consumption. especially the consumption of healthy food, which wasn't as readily consumed as more processed items.
So the third theme we noticed we call an expectation to eat. So occasionally teachers provided encouragement to students to eat the rest of their apple or finish their milk. However, overall, we noticed that there was really no surprise or astonishment or encouragement when a student would take eat a lot of, or even all of their food and throw it into the trash. And so this is something we were really curious about, and we want to, with surveys and more targeted interviews, understand more what might contribute to teacher apathy toward food waste.
So next we're going to look at our quantitative data. So a little bit of the specifics, we conducted 8 waste audits, so 4 at Johnson and 4 at Venable. And what you see on the screen is the average amount wasted in percent per day of each item. So a couple of findings that were pretty significant. As you can see, we found that at least 24% of each item was wasted every day at lunch on average, which is almost a quarter, a pretty significant number. And then salads that were served, both as small sides and as main courses, were almost never fully consumed, as you can see in this picture right here. Also, we noticed that students almost never chose to take the maximum number of fruits and vegetables allowed by the program, which was 4. And then we also think it's important to note that more processed items like pizza and French fries were placed on trays before they were given to the students, whereas fruits and vegetables only made it onto the trays if students chose those options.
So next steps, we want to start doing some surveys and focus groups with students to help understand the issue of food waste from the students' point of view. And we've started to develop these surveys in conjunction with faculty in the schools to sort of continue this practice of co-production of knowledge.
So next, we understand that this is a dynamic problem, but our solution, as we understand the problem right now, is we're having a collaborative cooking event with schools in May of this year. So we have a couple of chef partners in Charlottesville who've agreed to come and help us cook food that's already on the school lunch menus in different ways, so that students can vote on new ways to prepare the food that they're served in schools.
So we believe really that increasing agency with students will increase in healthy food consumption. So by showing students they can exercise some choice of the options presented to them, we hope to get them excited about an after-school collaborative cooking process where, similar to the event in May, professional chefs will come into the schools, work with students and cafeteria staff to redevelop the foods which are already presented to them in lunch in new creative ways with student input. And then over the course of a year, the menu will change item by item to literally reflect the taste of the students. So hopefully that healthy food consumption will become the norm.
So we also want to emphasize that this is a fluid, flexible project, and one that will never cease to be receptive to the knowledge of our students and teacher participants. And we also want, as indicated by that arrow to nowhere, or to somewhere, we also want to emphasize that the project is receptive to external influence and is meant to be a continuous process of data collection and solution implementation. And here, so all of us, us 2 and then our 2 other researchers right here, we're all graduating in May. And so we're currently in the process of passing on the project to our new team.
So lastly, we really want to emphasize something that we've learned that's really important. One of those important things we've learned through this whole research process is that in development work, we should be scaling practices, not solutions. So while this project has been lengthy and work intensive, we believe that our research practices, including various aspects of participatory development, co-production, and using local knowledge, are scalable practices. However, we want to emphasize that the solutions we develop for these schools in Charlottesville are not one size fits all. They are solutions that are contextualized in Charlottesville, and they're really made for these communities themselves. But we do want to emphasize the practices and methods are scalable in the sense that when we implement them in different locales, they will create equally effective, contextualized, and specific solutions. So the processes we've used in Charlottesville can identify areas for improvement from within the communities all over the country in order to shape local solutions as products of local knowledge and agency.
All right, thank you guys for listening. Real quick, we just want to thank our advisor, David Edmonds, and our other 2 researchers right here, Jennifer and Rachel, as well as the Global Studies Department at UVA, Notre Dame for hosting us, and all of our funders and partners in Charlottesville.
For letting us go.